Get your hand off my arm before I break it at the wrist. My brother-in-law didn't listen. Derek Holloway never listened to anyone who didn't have a corner office. And he definitely wasn't going to start listening to the sister-in-law he called a military washout for the last 9 years. His fingers dug into my elbow, dragging me back from the rope line at the Camp Pendleton Air Show like I was a stray dog that wandered too close to his barbecue. My younger sister Rachel stood 2 feet behind him, arms crossed, watching with the same tight little smile she'd worn our whole childhood whenever someone else took the hit for her. I let him pull. I didn't fight it. Fighting wasn't the point yet. 35 minutes earlier, the desert heat had been sitting on the tarmac in visible waves, the kind that make the horizon shimmer like water that isn't there. I'd driven 4 hours from my apartment in a beat-up Corolla with a check engine light I couldn't afford to fix, just to watch my nephew Caleb's junior ROTC unit get recognized on the field. I wasn't there for Derek. I wasn't there for the champagne tent or the contractors in their pressed polos comparing watch brands. I was there for a 12-year-old kid who still thought his Aunt Mia was a substitute teacher who couldn't hold down a real job. That's what they all thought. Substitute teacher. Couldn't hold down a real job. 9 years of that story, and I'd let it stand, because the truth was locked in a filing cabinet in Coronado that didn't officially exist, and because the alternative to their contempt was a conversation I wasn't ready to have. I'd worn the only clean thing I owned that wasn't already stained with dry erase marker, a faded Marine Corps marathon shirt from a race I never actually finished, paired with jeans and running shoes with the tread worn smooth on the outside edge. Not the VIP dress code. Derek's contractor buddies wore golf shirts with company logos stitched over the heart, the kind that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. When I ducked under the velvet rope to get closer to the flight line, the same flight line I used to own, the same flight line where I used to be the only woman in a room full of men who called me "sir" out of habit, and then caught themselves, Derek's hand found my arm like it had been waiting all day for a reason. "You don't belong on this side, Mia." He said my name like it tasted bad in his mouth. "This is client-facing. Actual professionals. Go stand with the tourists where you're comfortable." Behind him, one of his engineers, a heavy-set guy named Phil with sunburn creeping up his neck, actually laughed. Not a big laugh. Just enough to let me know he'd heard, and enough to let Derek know he had an audience worth performing for. "Derek." My voice came out flat. Even. The same flat, even voice I used to give landing coordinates over a compromised frequency. "Take your hand off me! Or what?" He smiled the way rich men smile at women they've decided don't matter. "You gonna fail me a pop quiz?" Rachel actually giggled at that. My own sister. The same sister I'd wired $600 to 11 months ago when her water heater broke and Derek was, between liquidity events, which was his phrase, for the 3rd time in 5 years, he'd tanked money into a defense subcontracting deal that hadn't closed yet. She'd taken the money, she hadn't paid it back. And now she stood there giggling at her husband, calling me a joke in front of strangers holding $14 beers. I looked past both of them, out toward the flight line, where a maintenance crew was doing a walk-around on an F-35's parked wing-to-wing with an aging F/A-18 that was there for the static display. My eyes drifted. Out of 9 years of habit, I couldn't switch off. Toward the runway threshold, toward the windsock hanging limp in the dead afternoon air, toward the thin cirrus streaking high enough that it wouldn't matter to anyone flying today. That's when the radio, on a nearby ground crew chief's hip, cracked open with a voice that stopped being routine. "Tower, this is Rampage 2-1. I have a hydraulic failure. Repeat, hydraulic failure. Requesting emergency vector for immediate return." The ground crew chief's face went white in about half a second. He turned, sprinting toward the command trailer, radio pressed against his ear. Somewhere behind me, the announcer on the PA system, a cheerful contractor's voice that had spent the last hour talking about American air power like it was a car commercial, went dead silent mid-sentence. Derek's hand was still on my arm. He hadn't noticed anything change. He was too busy enjoying himself. "I'm serious, Mia. You're an embarrassment. You always have been. Ever since you..." Rampage 2-1. Be advised you have 0 flap authority. Gear indication is unsafe. Say souls on board. The voice crackling over that ground chief's hip radio had gone tight. Controlled panic dressed up as procedure. I knew that tone. I used to make people speak in that tone. 2 on board, Tower. My WSO is unconscious. I've got smoke in the cockpit. I am not. I say again, I am not able to maintain altitude. 2 souls, 1 unconscious. Smoke in the cockpit. My spine did something it hadn't done in 9 years. It locked, straight and cold, every muscle from my neck to my hips snapping into a stillness that had nothing to do with fear. Derek felt it. His hand actually loosened, just slightly, confused by the sudden granite where a moment ago there'd been a woman he could push around. "What's wrong with you?" he said. I didn't answer him. I was doing math. Wind at 6 knots out of the west, negligible. Altitude, unknown. But the jet was inbound from the training area to the northeast, which put probable descent path directly over the crowd line if the pilot lost the rest of his hydraulics before final approach. A jet with an unconscious weapons systems officer and failing hydraulics doesn't hold a stable glide slope. It falls in increments, each one worse than the last, until either the pilot finds a miracle or there isn't a jet left to talk about. I ripped my arm out of Derek's grip so fast he stumbled sideways into Phil. "Hey!" I was already moving. Not toward the bleachers, not away from the noise like everyone else on the tourist side had started doing. Phones up, screaming, a wall of civilian panic, rolling backward from the flight line, like a wave hitting a seawall. I moved forward, toward the restricted zone, toward the red and white barrier that every sign for 200 yards told me not to cross. Derek's voice chased me. "Security! Hey, get her. She's going to get herself killed, this crazy—" I didn't hear the rest. I was already past the rope, past 2 Marines in dress uniforms who were staring up at the sky instead of watching the perimeter, past a family who'd frozen mid-photograph with a stroller wedged sideways in the panic. I hit the security line at a dead run, and a young MP couldn't have been older than 20, cheeks still round with baby fat under his cover, stepped into my path with his hand raised. "Ma'am, you need to fall back. This area is—" "What's your name, Corporal?" He blinked, thrown by the question, thrown more by the tone underneath it, a tone that didn't match the woman in a marathon shirt standing in front of him. "Reyes, ma'am, but you can't." "Reyes, radio your watch commander. Tell him Commander Voss is inbound to the command trailer and I need eyes on the emergency net right now." "Commander who?" I didn't have time to explain rank insignia to a corporal on a Saturday. I reached into the small zippered pocket sewn into the waistband of my running shorts, a habit I'd never broken, not once in 9 years, not even at a barbecue, not even at a funeral, and pulled out a black card, edges worn soft from years of being carried and never used. I held it up in front of his face for exactly 1 second. His whole posture changed. His hand dropped. His mouth opened and nothing came out. "Radio it in," I said, already walking past him. Now, behind me, I heard Derek's voice again, closer now, breathless from jogging to catch up, still convinced this was about him somehow. "Mia! Mia, get back here. You don't have clearance. You're going to get arrested. You don't even work anymore. You're a substitute." I didn't turn around. Some things don't deserve a response. I kept walking straight toward the command trailer, toward the low hum of frantic radio chatter spilling out of the open door, toward the only version of myself that had ever made sense. Inside the trailer, it was a different kind of heat, close and electric. 3 enlisted radar operators hunched over consoles with their headsets jammed hard against their skulls, a young lieutenant commander standing at the center table with both fists planted on the edge like he was trying to keep the table itself from flying apart. The wall display showed a single blinking icon, losing altitude in jagged increments, 500 feet, 400, climbing back to 450, then dropping again, the visual signature of a pilot fighting a jet that no longer wanted to fly. "He's not going to make the runway," the lieutenant commander was saying, mostly to himself. "He's going to put it in the water or he's going to put it in the crowd. There's no other. There's a third option." My voice cut through the trailer, and every head turned at once. I saw the lieutenant commander's eyes drop to my shirt, my shorts, my running shoes, the same fast, dismissive scan Derek had given me an hour earlier, and for half a second I watched him decide I was some lost civilian who'd wandered into the wrong tent. "Ma'am, this is a restricted—" I set the black card down on the table between us, hard enough that it cracked against the laminate. He looked down. He read it. I watched his face do the thing every face in that trailer would do in the next 30 seconds. The specific, total collapse of certainty, the moment a person's entire model of who's in charge gets rewritten in real time. "You're—" He looked back up at me, and his voice had lost its command table certainty entirely. "You're Voss, the test program. I thought you—" I retired. I kept my voice level, because there wasn't time for anything else. I didn't disappear. Put me on that frequency. He didn't argue. Nobody in that trailer argued. A headset was in my hand inside 3 seconds, and I was talking before I'd even finished pulling it over my ears. Rampage 2-1. This is Valor. I am a former test pilot on scene. I am assuming coordination on this frequency. Acknowledge. Static. Then, thin and strained, a voice fighting through smoke and adrenaline. Valor. Rampage 2-1. I copy. Go ahead. I don't. I've got partial hydraulics. My gear won't extend. My backseater's out cold from the smoke. I don't know how much longer I can hold this thing level. What's your name? Rampage. Lieutenant Okafor, ma'am. I mean Valor. Sorry, Lieutenant Okafor, listen to my voice and only my voice. You are not going to eject over that crowd line. You are not going to ditch in the bay with an unconscious backseater. You are going to fly this jet exactly the way I tell you, one input at a time, and you are going to walk away from this today. Do you copy? A pause. Just long enough for me to hear his breathing shake once, twice, and then steady. Copy, Valor. I copy. I looked up at the lieutenant commander, who was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. Get me a jet. There's nothing fueled and ready. The only aircraft on this flight line that's... The Hornet on static display. Is the fuel load real or is it a shell? He blinked. It's real. It's flying stock. They use it for the flyover portion, but there's no pilot cleared for... There is now. I was already moving toward the door. Get your fire crews staged on the overrun. Clear every civilian off that bleacher line in the next 90 seconds. And somebody find that kid's father, Lieutenant Okafor, has family in this crowd somewhere, and I want a name for him to hold on to when this is over. I stepped back out into the daylight, and the entire tone of the base had changed in the 6 minutes I'd been inside. What had been panic was curdling into something closer to a held breath. Hundreds of people, frozen mid-motion, faces turned up to a sky that held a dying jet, trailing a thin, dark thread of smoke against the blue. I jogged toward the static display line, where 2 crew chiefs stood next to the parked Hornet, arguing with each other about whether the aircraft could even be moved on short notice. It can, I said, pulling the flight suit someone had thrown at me over my running clothes without breaking stride, zipping it one-handed. Get me a helmet and get that tow bar off the nose gear right now. One of them, an older chief with a gray mustache and a name tape that read Gutierrez, looked at me the way Derek had looked at me an hour ago, like I was something that had wandered in from the wrong side of a rope. Ma'am, respectfully, this bird hasn't flown combat maneuvers in... Chief. I flew test profiles on this airframe before you made E6. Move the tow bar. Something in my voice must have landed the way it needed to, because he moved. Within 90 seconds, I was in the cockpit, running through a start sequence my hands remembered even though 9 years of chalk dust and lesson plans had tried to convince me they'd forgotten. The canopy sealed down over me with a hiss, and for one suspended second, the world outside went quiet, and it was just me and the instrument panel and the low building thunder of an engine I hadn't touched since the day I signed my separation paperwork. I lifted off the runway into a sky that still smelled like burning avionics somewhere ahead of me. Rampage 2-1. Valor is airborne. I have you on visual. Hold your current heading. Valor, I see you. Jesus, I see you. I closed the distance fast, throttle forward, and pulled alongside his crippled jet close enough to see the black scorch marks streaking back from his nose gear door. Close enough to see, through his canopy, the slumped shoulder of his unconscious backseater strapped rigid against the ejection seat. Okafor's hands were locked white-knuckled on the stick, his whole body rigid with the specific fear of a man watching a machine stop answering him. Listen to me, Lieutenant. Your hydraulics are bleeding out through a line somewhere aft, which means you have maybe 6-7 minutes of partial control left before you lose it completely. We are not waiting for that. I'm going to fly formation on your left wing, and I need you to match my rate of descent exactly. Don't fight the stick, don't chase it, just mirror me. Copy mirroring you. I eased down and felt the ugly, turbulent wash rolling off his wounded jet hit my own airframe, a rattling, uneven buffet that meant his wing was no longer producing clean lift. I nudged closer. Inside the margin, every flight manual on Earth would call reckless, until the high-pressure air spilling off my right wing slid underneath the dead half of his left one, and, for just a moment, steadied it. Whoa, Valor! I've got a nose angle back. What did you... Don't ask questions, fly the jet. We're doing this the whole way down. Down on the ground, I found out later, the entire crowd had gone dead silent, watching two aircraft locked together against a bruised orange sky, one of them trailing smoke, the other one flying so close its wingtip looked close enough to touch. Derek was there in that crowd, I was told, standing next to Rachel with his mouth hanging open, having finally stopped talking. Gears not extending, Valor. I've got a red light on the left main. Then we're bringing you in on the belly. Cut your engine on my mark, and Okafor when I say eject the canopy, you punch it, but not before, because that backseater doesn't survive an ejection at this altitude with the injuries he's already got. You understand me? Yes. Yes, ma'am. We came down together, his jet grinding metal-on-metal contact against my wingtip twice in the final 90 seconds as the crosswind tried to peel us apart, sparks trailing off both airframes in a shower that any sane pilot would have broken away from immediately. I didn't break away. His gear collapsed on touchdown in a shriek of tearing metal and a spray of orange sparks fanning out across the runway, and I stayed wing-locked with him through the entire skid, using my own control surfaces to keep his nose from digging in and cartwheeling the both of us into the overrun barrier. We stopped 400 feet from the end of the runway, in a cloud of fire-suppressant foam and torn rubber, and a silence so total, it felt like the whole base was holding its breath at once. Then the crowd noise hit, not applause, not yet, just a rolling wave of disbelief cracking open into sound. Thousands of people finding their voices again, all at the same moment. I got Okafor and his backseater out of that jet myself, my hands shaking with an adrenaline crash I hadn't felt since my last classified deployment, and by the time the flight surgeons had them both loaded and moving, General Patricia Reyes Hall, the base commander, a woman I'd flown under years ago when she was still a colonel, was standing on the tarmac in front of me, and she didn't ask a single question about protocol. She saluted me, in front of 5,000 people, in front of news cameras that had already started rolling, in front of Derek Holloway, who stood at the edge of that crowd with a face the color of old paper, finally understanding exactly who he'd spent 9 years calling a washout. "Welcome back, Commander Voss," she said, and her voice carried across that stunned, silent tarmac like a verdict. I didn't smile. I didn't look for Derek. I pulled off my helmet and let my hair down out of its knot and stood there in a flight suit zipped over a marathon shirt, breathing hard, feeling something in my chest finally unclench after 9 long years of being told I was less than the people around me. That night, in the base medical tent, getting checked over for the bruising along my ribs where the harness had bitten in during the landing, my phone lit up with a text from Rachel. "Mia, please call me. Derek is freaking out. People are saying his company's contracts are getting pulled because of how he treated you on camera. Please, we're family. Just talk to the general for us." I looked at that message for exactly as long as it deserved, which was not very long at all, and then I turned the phone face down on the exam table and let it go dark. A young airman knocked on the tent flap a few minutes later. Corporal Reyes, the same kid who'd tried to stop me at the barrier that afternoon. He stood at attention so stiff it looked like it hurt. "Ma'am, Commander, I want to apologize. I didn't know who you were, and I should have listened faster. You did your job, Corporal. You just didn't know the whole picture yet. Neither did anybody else on this base." I studied him for a second, this kid who couldn't have been older than 20, trying so hard to hold his spine straight in front of someone he'd nearly turned away an hour before disaster proved him wrong. "You held the line the way you were trained to. That matters more than you think." He exhaled like he'd been holding his breath since that afternoon, and something in his shoulders came down half an inch. General Reyes Hall came by not long after, minus the entourage this time, just her, sitting down across from me on a folding chair like 2 women who'd earned the right to stop performing rank for one evening. "You know they're going to want you back," she said. "Officially this time. Not test program black budget back. Full recall, advisory board, the works. I know. You gonna say yes?" I thought about my classroom back home, the one with the broken projector, and the 26 kids who thought their substitute science teacher had never done anything more exciting than grade a pop quiz. I thought about how many of them, just like Derek, just like Rachel, had built an entire opinion of my worth out of the clothes I could afford and the car I drove, and never once asked what 9 years of silence might be hiding underneath. I said slowly, I want to do both. There's value in a classroom nobody sees too. I just don't think I need to hide which one I already proved myself in. General Reyes Hall nodded like that was exactly the answer she'd expected, and let the silence sit there, comfortable, unhurried, The first comfortable silence I could remember sharing with another adult in longer than I wanted to admit. Outside the tent, the base had gone quiet. In that particular way, a place goes quiet after it survives something it wasn't sure it would. Somewhere out past the flight line, 500 service members stood in loose formation under a sky bruised purple and orange at the edges, waiting, I was told, for a chance to shake the hand of the woman who'd talked a dying jet home. I hadn't asked for that. I didn't need it, not really. What I needed had already happened the moment I stopped letting a man like Derek Holloway decide what I was worth with his hand wrapped around my arm. I stood up, my ribs aching, my legs unsteady from 9 years of muscle memory waking up all at once in a single brutal afternoon, and I walked back out toward the flight line to see Lieutenant Okafor before they moved him to the hospital in San Diego. He was awake, bandaged, his backseater stable 2 beds down, and when he saw me come through the curtain, he tried to sit up too fast and winced. "Don't," I said, easing him back down. "You did good today. You listened when it counted. That's the whole job. They're saying you hadn't flown in almost a decade. I hadn't. How did you? Because some things don't leave you just because you stop using them for a while. They wait." I looked past him, out the small window at the darkening runway, at the lights strung along the taxiway blinking steady red against the coming night. "People will tell you who you are for years, Lieutenant. Family, especially. They'll build a whole story about your worth out of your bank account or your car or the shirt on your back, and they'll believe it so hard you start to believe it too. But it was never true. It was just the story that was easiest for them to tell." He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, quietly, "Thank you for not letting me eject over that crowd. Thank you for trusting me when it mattered." I squeezed his shoulder once and turned to go. I never did call Rachel back that week. Derek's contracts, the ones he'd spent 9 years dangling over every family dinner like proof of his own importance, were suspended, pending review within 72 hours. And the local news ran the tarmac salute on a loop for 3 straight days under headlines that all said some version of the same thing. Hidden hero, secret past, the woman nobody saw coming. I watched exactly one of those broadcasts, on a small television in the break room of the same middle school I'd be walking back into that Monday, and then I turned it off and went to go photocopy a worksheet on projectile motion, because it turns out you can hold 2 truths in the same hands. You can be the woman who talked a dying jet home over a silent crowd, and you can also be the woman who spends her Tuesdays teaching 12-year-olds why a ball thrown at an angle follows a parabola. Neither one makes you smaller. Neither one needs the other's permission to exist. If somebody in your life has ever looked at what you have, or don't have, and decided that's the whole story of who you are, I want you to know they were wrong, the same way Derek was wrong, the same way every person on that tarmac who underestimated a woman in a worn-out marathon shirt was wrong. Worth was never something other people got to hand out. It was something you'd been carrying the entire time, whether or not anyone bothered to look close enough to see it. I'm not asking you to prove anything to the people who doubted you. I'm asking you to remember that you never needed to. Keep your spine straight. Keep showing up, even in the version of your life nobody's applauding. One day the sky falls, in whatever shape it falls in for you, and you'll find out exactly what you were made of the entire time.